Hey everyone, my name is Dominique Nieves and I run the Read Latinx Writers Initiative and Iron Glove Productions. And if you're unfamiliar with it, Read Latinx Writers is a mentorship program that connects aspiring writers with WGA writers for script reads and mentorship. And with me today is one of our current mentees from our current cohort who was also accepted to the Nickelodeon Writing Program. Welcome.
Hello, hello.
Please, Hunter, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. I'm Hunter. I am Puerto Rican. I'm from South Florida, the worst state. I'll hear nothing otherwise about it. I do love Florida though. Love-hate relationship. Yeah, I was a 2020 Blacklist Women in Film Episodic Lab writer. And then this past year in January 2020 was selected for the Nickelodeon Writing Program, and it has been a dream come true. So I just finished my first staff writing gig too for a Peacock show, which was really exciting and happy to be here.
That's so exciting. Congratulations on
Yeah,
all of it.
thank you.
It's really special for me because I've gotten to know you throughout this time. Really, when, right before you started applying to these programs, and I kind of got to see
Yeah,
your journey just skyrocket so quickly. It's so
yeah.
exciting. So,
Yeah, we're real Zoom friends because we've never met
I
in
know
person.
because it's been
Crazy.
a 5 year apocalypse, but
Yeah, truly.
it's nice to have had that community and that network during this time,
Yeah.
especially.
Shout out to Eric Kaplan for
I
starting
know.
a Zoom teaching class thing. It was awesome.
So let's go into that. So you talked about all these programs that you were doing. So take us back to when you first started applying for all these amazing fellowships. What were you up to? What were you doing?
Yeah, I was an assistant. I was assistant for an animation studio. I had been like a PA before that and done like a lot of small random gigs. But I was probably 2 years into being an assistant for this animation studio, Bento Box. They do some cool stuff. Check them out. And that's when I had always been applying to stuff, but never anything happened. I think I got denied from the Nick program twice or three times. I can't remember at this point. And then was in the pandemic, like had extra time to write, I guess. I really don't even know what it is. I don't know if it's that I had put in like 3 years of developing my voice as a writer, and a comedian, or if it was that I finally had time to write.
Yeah.
Either way, I like had a really intense Excel sheet of like where I was applying to and when the deadlines were and what was required. And yeah, it was the first time I saw any success because both the Blacklist Women in Film Episodic Lab and the Nickelodeon program were kind of in the same circuit. Like I applied for both those things in 2020, even though only the Blacklist happened in 2020 and Nickelodeon was 2021.
And so you mentioned, sorry, I'm going to backtrack you,
Yeah,
that you
yeah.
were an assistant. You weren't in the writer's room, though.
No, I was a producer's assistant.
Okay, and what is
Yeah.
that like?
Hectic, fun. I worked with people who took me seriously creatively, which I was really grateful for. They were never like, oh, but you're the assistant, don't pitch. They were always like, you're welcome to pitch, just like read the room before you pitch on things. I was reading a lot of scripts, watching a lot of table reads, so much scheduling, so much scheduling.
So a lot of
um,
scheduling, but it sounds like a lot that
yeah.
did inform your work as a writer as well, at least.
Yeah, it at least made me start taking myself and my dream more seriously because people who had like been producers on thing would be like, "Oh, I'm happy to read your script," and they would give notes and feedback, and maybe they were just lying to me. But when they would say positive things, I was like, "Oh, maybe I can actually do this." So,
Yeah, and quick,
yeah,
quick plug for the Read Latinx Writers Initiative.
yeah.
Also giving you another person to read your script.
Yeah, it was so great too. Gonzalo's the best. That's who my mentee was, and Dom set us up and still obsessed with him. Was so cool. His notes were really helpful. So definitely sign up if you're doing it again this year.
And even if you're not in the current cohort and you have to wait till Latino Heritage Month when our Latinx Heritage Month when we open up the next cohort, I think it sounds like a good idea to get people to read your script. So maybe a writers group, getting friends to read your script.
Yeah.
That's definitely part
Yeah,
of the
if you're gonna
process.
ask if you have like connections to people who like do this for a living, I would say make sure your script is in a really good spot before you ask them to read it because you don't want to burn a read. but get your friends to read it, get a writer's group, and then have it ready for when you meet a producer who's like, I'll take a look at your stuff, and then you're golden.
So let's jump right into the application process. And
Yes.
so you mentioned that, this was the year that you kind of just got into all of these fellowships. And you mentioned that you also had this spreadsheet.
I also got rejected from stuff, if that helps anyone out there. Definitely got rejected to stuff. But yeah, I did have a spreadsheet.
And what do you think? So let's talk about aspects of the application. So let's talk about the Nickelodeon application. So there's a couple of things, for instance, your resume. Do you think anything on your resume stood out? Do you think it was helpful that you had assistant experience?
I think it helped, but I don't think it would hurt if you didn't have like assistant experience. Like if you did something like this, it would be really helpful. I think what all of the programs are trying to prove, or at least the ones that I talked to and interviewed with, they wanted to have a sense that you are networking. So like even if you're not in LA, even if you're not in the industry, they want to feel like, what have you been doing to hustle for your career? Because the thing they can tell you about these programs is they're trying to get the people who are like ready to staff, just haven't been discovered. Like they don't want someone who's like, I'm learning how to write a screenplay, what's final draft? Like that's your too early stages. What they want is someone who's like about ready to launch. So if you can, like they'll ask, I've had multiple interviews where they've asked like, what are you doing to know people around town in LA if you don't live there? So I think it helped that I had assistant experience. I was coming from Atlanta, and the animation studio I worked for has an office in LA and Atlanta. I was in the Atlanta office. So I think it helped, but I don't want someone to hear that and be like, oh God, I don't have industry experience. That will count against me. It's not true. They're interested in any story that makes you unique. And like I talked more in my interviews about working at as a pediatric radiation oncology coordinator for a hospital than I did my assistant job. So anything can count towards it. You just have to show that you're like hustling.
And you don't have to necessarily be in LA. You can be doing other things. For instance, you and I met through that class online, especially.
Yeah.
The one good thing that came out of the apocalypse is that there's more access no matter where you are, even if you're not in an industry hub at the moment.
Totally.
So let's
totally.
Let's talk about, I think, what's hopefully the most enjoyable part for everyone, but probably the hardest part. Let's talk about your writing samples. Let's talk about your spec, and then they want you to also do an original. So what kind of show did you spec?
I did Pen 15. It's one of my favorite shows, so it was very fun to get to write a fake episode of it.
And so I know there are like these cardinal rules for specs, like doing like a bottle episode, and I've broken those before and gotten to the interview process. So I love people when you have those stories. When I was first starting to apply to these programs, I would look it up and I would see all of the responses from people, and they would say things like, they say don't do a holiday episode, but that's what I did. They say don't do this, but that's what I did. And so were there any rules that you broke, or are there any tips for writing a spec that stands out?
Yeah, multiple. The first is like rules matter until you're good enough to break them. So like if you're really excited to tell an episode of, I don't know, Blackish that like introduces a new character, like I introduced a new character in my script, I didn't make him the focus of the episode. Like he was a funny runner throughout. So I think if you're going to break a rule, don't be like, my whole episode is about a character that doesn't exist on a spec show, because that will be a problem. But I think you want to show that you can obviously nail the tone of the voice, nail the jokes, nail the like arc and storyline and all that stuff. But if you have an interesting perspective, like whether that's a character on the show who like hasn't had their due, like what's their episode look like kind of thing. Because basically with both the original and the spec, the goal is to stand out from like thousands of other scripts. And imagine that someone is doing, like hundreds of people are doing the same show as you and probably have a similar idea. So my other advice, and this is what I did, is like, that's the spec is where you show what you know. Like if you are someone who grew up, and like my spec was all about a bar mitzvah, because I grew up going to so many bar mitzvahs. Like I actually had my kinseh early because I was jealous of all of my Jewish friends. So I like begged to have my kinseh at 13, and my dad like gave into it. It was like a very non-traditional
Amazing.
quince, but I was like milking that aspect of it. I was like, please. My dad made me dance with him. I was like, my Jewish friends don't dance with their dad. He's like, we're doing this. This is non-negotiable. Like stuff like that. So I didn't write that as an episode, obviously, because there's not a Latina character in Pen 15. But I did write about like what happens when Sam has a bar mitzvah, and like using those like terrible cringy memories of like practicing to grind. Like I used very gross personal stories of like practicing on a teddy bear with friends, and like getting accused of like molesting the stuffed animal teddy bear that I stole from my brother to practice on. Like I used that in the script. And then when we talked about it in the interview, they were like, so do you have a lot of like traumatic grinding stories? And I was like, I do, actually. I'm happy to tell you more about them. So yeah, like use something, like if you know soccer really well, if you grew up like playing competitive sports, like you can find a way to throw that in if it feels natural. But I think having some kind of personal element to the story helps, especially to show that like you can add something to an existing show.
That's so helpful. I don't know. I think I always think about that for the original, and I don't know if I've ever heard anyone say that about the spec, so that's amazing.
Yeah. It was really helpful for me.
People get a little bit frustrated because I think the industry has moved a little bit more towards original samples, and people don't want to do the spec just for the application. I've spoken to a rep who was like, well, it's a good exercise.
Yeah.
You should probably just be doing that as an exercise. What are your thoughts on that? Have you ever used that script ever again?
Yeah, I also think it's a good exercise. I almost feel like no writing is time wasted unless you hate the story and you're like doing it because someone's trying to make you do it. But for the most part, like it is a very helpful exercise. Structure is probably my weakest part as a writer, and so it was really helpful, like forcing myself to break a story like an existing show. I have used it, strangely. Like my reps, I don't think ever read it or wanted to read it. I don't think it's ever gotten me like a staffing meeting or a general, so it's not been used outside of Nickelodeon. But at Nickelodeon, like I would meet with an exec who'd be like, I love Pen 15, I'd love to read your episode. And like weirdly, that got me more meetings at Nickelodeon. So some places still really like it. Like some people prefer that. I have met one or two showrunners who prefer spec scripts, but it just depends. I wouldn't say I use it as often as originals, though, by any stretch.
Interesting. So you brought something up that makes me wants to ask a question, but I'm going to keep going on this vein of the Nickelodeon program. You have my wheels turning, as you can see. So thank you for sharing. So sticking to the Nickelodeon program application.
Yeah.
So I noticed this year on their website, they mention that you don't necessarily have to do the same age group or the same theme for your spec and your original, which I think is really interesting because a lot of programs will say, like, make sure they're in the same tone. So did you find that to be true? Did you do kind of different specs versus your original?
Yeah, my original was a kids animated script. Like it was very ages 6 to 11, like very kid appropriate, kid friendly. But my original, as I just described, was not, and it's not a show.
And live action.
Yeah, and live action.
Interesting.
And the other people in my cohort, like chosen for this past year, like had some very adult, explicit themes or stories that they told. So I think like a lot of people, I hear questions of like, oh gosh, if I write something that's a little raunchy, will that count against me? Because I think people think Nickelodeon kids, and that's true. But they're also adults reading your script. Like they want to laugh. I think what matters more is like an interesting, unique, comedic point of view. And if you love kids, then that's great because you're showing that you want to work at Nickelodeon. But if you have a raunchier sense of humor, that's not going to count against you if it's genuinely funny.
That's fantastic. That's kind of hilarious also.
Yeah. It was crazy. Like when I met with the preschool team at Nickelodeon, who are so lovely and funny, they were like, we'll read your kid's script, but we want to read your Pen 15. And I was like, like I wouldn't imagine pre-K. Like that's like the sweetest, nicest TV. It's like teaching lessons about like responsibility and sharing, and they're like reading my very weird, raunchy grind fest.
Lessons about grinding. It's also very important, okay?
Honestly.
We need lessons at all stages of life, okay?
Exactly.
So I have a question in the chat about the personal essay and what should we focus on.
Oh, guys, those
And
are
so,
nightmares. I get it. I get it. They're nightmares. Okay, sorry. What's the question though? Just like,
yeah, so I'm actually trying to see if I have it here. So I'm assuming, okay, so there's two questions that I think would count as personal questions
yeah.
this year. One is, what unique or underrepresented perspective would your voice contribute to Nickelodeon, which I think is probably the hardest question for me.
Also,
And
isn't
then
it
the
like 150 words? It's like, tell me
yeah,
about yourself in a funny, interesting way. You have 30 seconds. Go.
I
It's insane. Yeah.
I kind of remember us like laughing about this and being like, "Well, I'm Puerto Rican."
Yeah.
Period. What more do you need?
Yeah.
But also, and then they ask you the question with 500 words. Tell us your story.
Yep. And here's the
So
thing. Here's the
please.
thing. I am like a desperate overthinker about everything. And so these kind of questions really make me spiral to the level of like red string on the wall. Like, what is my story? I fall into conspiracy theories. I'm like, do I even have a story? Who am I? I don't know anymore. The most helpful things that help me like not spiral. One, there is no right or wrong way to answer that question. So instead of being like, oh my God, what does that mean? Like, what does it make you think of? Like, truly, it's that simple. And it's so tricksy that and all of them are like that. This is not to call Nickelodeon out. Every single program I applied to was like, who are you in 500 words? And you're like,
Yeah.
what am I supposed to do with this?
Yeah.
So don't overthink it. I know that's impossible not to do, but truly just answer the question. Try and tell it in a funny narrative way. This is a comedy fellowship. Like they specifically want you to be funny. So I know it's hard. But what I like about the Nickelodeon program, rather than some of the other questions I read from other ones, like they're not looking for your trauma porn. You're welcome to share your story. And if that includes hard parts, you're welcome to share it. But it's not like, here's every single bad thing that's happened to me. Pick me necessarily. And I feel like that's a lot of times what fellowships seemingly want. I'm grateful that that's not my experience at Nickelodeon. But yeah, try and make it funny. Try and make it interesting. Like, do not say I was raised by TV. Everyone who wants to be a TV writer had a sad childhood and wanted to be raised by TV. If you're a comedian, you have trauma. We get it. So
just at people, why don't you?
So just
Hunter is like, everyone in the chat, you had a sad childhood.
We all did. Look, why do we desperately want people to laugh at our jokes all day? There's something there. Get a therapist, have a copay, save that. But truly, like, don't mention how much you love TV. Like, you can say that you love TV, but don't say it raised you, because they get that all the time. I tried to think of the stories that I would tell my friends, and they would be like, wait, what? That was your childhood? Like, I grew up on a literal swamp that used to be an alligator farm. My neighborhood used to be an alligator farm. And, like, there was a lot of very weird swamp-related Florida stuff that when I would tell people, thinking everyone else thought it was normal because it was just my childhood, and they'd be like, excuse me? Your golden retriever fought alligators? What are you talking about? That's an insane thing that happened to you that you act like is normal. So, like, those are the kind of tidbits you put in your story, not I watched a lot of SpongeBob, which I did. I watched too much SpongeBob probably as a kid, but save that for your interview.
So, you know what? Thank you for the segue.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, now you've done your spec.
Yeah.
You've got your super awesome original. You've had a bunch of friends read it, and then once friends have approved it, it's really well put together. You might have some industry friends read it, industry connections. And then we have these essays that we just talked about, insert yourself, be funny. And now it's time for the interview.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what your interview process was like. Did you get nervous? Anything we should know?
So I've done a lot of like improv and performing, and I have always, like, when I've gone on stage, I black out. Like, I couldn't tell you if the show was good. I can tell you a feeling I had, or like if I remember laughs, but like I kind of just detach and go out of body, and then later I'm like, was that good? I don't even know. So I didn't get nervous for my interview. I got nervous afterwards. Like, I would have the interview, and then I'd be like, what did I say? Like, did I say the dumbest things in the world? Like, I really truly cannot remember anything. So that's not helpful. But find like I don't know. I think just, again, from improv, like, it's cheesy, but like, does it help you to listen to like one Taylor Swift song? I don't know your life. Like, whatever it is that gets you pumped up or feeling calm, depending on what you need. I have kind of a manic energy always, so I tend to like let that thrive before a meeting. So that's the first part of what I'll say. The second part is they are truly looking for multiple things. Again, the biggest like overall thing I want to imprint on people is they're trying to see if you're already ready. Like, they're not trying to trick you. They're not trying to like ask you the wrong question and trip you up. They're already rooting for you. If you've gotten to the interview process of Nickelodeon, you've gone through 3 blind script reads of each of your scripts, like where people have to agree that they pass it forward and all that stuff. So they're already a fan of you. They want you to succeed, truly. Like, that's not just like weird overlord capitalism, me loving Nickelodeon. Like, that is just real. So you need to be in it and proving to them that like you are ready for this. Like, doesn't mean you can't be honest, doesn't mean you can't be like, yeah, like if they're like, what's your weakness? Answer honestly, because they want to see if they can help you in the program fix that. But like, if you don't have a writing process, you're probably not ready for this. Like, you need to be able to talk about when you come up with an idea, how do you pursue it? Like, what do you do? What's the next steps? You need to know Nickelodeon content, or wherever you're applying like the content of that place. You don't have to have watched 7 seasons of a kid's show. They're not insane. They don't expect you to know everything, but like, they did their research on you, you do their research on them. And they want to know like how many scripts you have, how are you networking, do you have a sense of yourself as a writer? Because if you don't, they can't help you get that. What they're trying to do is launch you as someone who already knows who you are as a writer and what you want to do. Of course, like, you don't have to be like, I know exactly what I want to do in 3 years kind of insanity, but you need to know who you are and like the general idea of the trajectory of your dream career, I would say.
So now that you've done all of this,
Yeah.
you've aced the interview because, like Hunter, you are a boss. You know exactly where you're going and how to get there.
Or you have no idea what you said and you don't remember, so just don't spiral about it. It's fine.
And now that you're there, can you tell us just a little bit about what it's like being in the program, how to make the most out of these programs?
Yeah. The program is really designed to help you succeed, and I wish I could go back and tell like little me from January, like, just take a breath. Honestly, dude, chill the fuck out. Why are you spiraling and ordering new planners? Like, you will be okay. They have a plan for you in place. But once you're there, like, really make the most of it. Like, meet every single person you can. Learn how to follow up with people in a way that doesn't feel like gross and seedy and usy, but like you're meeting people for a reason. They want to help you. If people are like, I want to help you, reach out, take them seriously. Write as much as you can. It was a dream come true to be paid to write for the first time. Like, I had always been paid as an assistant to help someone else's creative vision become reality. And I was finally like, I had a team of people being like, what's your vision? How can we help you? It's insane. It's like truly amazing. So take full advantage of that. Write your weird thing that you're like, nobody's ever going to buy this. Doesn't matter. Doesn't stand out as a sample. Great. Use it to try and connect with reps and really like develop your voice.
And this is probably on the website, so you can tell us if you're allowed to tell us, but this is a full-time program, right?
It's a full-time paid program. It's a year long, okay, which is so amazing. Really gives you time to like focus and practice. If you're not in LA, like I was someone in Atlanta, the program like provides a means for you to move, because normally it's in person. Obviously this year's been on Zoom, but yeah, it is truly a launching pad.
That's amazing. Yeah. I'm going to check the chat really fast.
Yeah.
And if you have any questions, audience, please send them over. Interesting. Okay, so okay, so this is a really popular question. and I think you said something about this, but
Yeah.
answer again. How do you know when it's ready to send out? And I actually am going to add my own little question in there because you did 2 fellowships. Were they the same script that got you into?
Different scripts.
So you just have a whole arsenal. So yeah, how did you know you were ready with those 2 different scripts?
Yeah, I feel of 2 minds about it. Just immediately off the bat, like half of me is like you never know, and the other half of me is like you have to know. So that's not helpful. Just that's not helpful. If it is this is the system that works for me. You have to find what works for you. That's like truly the theme of all writing advice. If it is what I set out for the script to be, like if it kind of matches the image I had in my head, the tone I had in my head, and I've had people read it and like I've gotten notes and I've fixed the arcs and stuff like that, then at that point is when I'm like, okay, it's ready. Does that make any sense at all?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I actually love that your advice is so centered on kind of you. Like, it's good to get notes, but it's also very much you decide, did I reach my goal? I think a lot of times we're looking for gratification.
Yes.
And it's really interesting how, I've had a script to get me to the interview, and then someone else had like very specific thoughts on it. And then someone else was like, this is ready.
Yeah.
Like to be made. You know what I mean? Like,
everyone's going to feel differently about it. So that's why I try and gauge it of like, with notes, I get notes and I like to give myself a day before I'm like I dig into them, and then I give myself a day to really think about it, and then I come back to the notes and read them again, so that if I bristled at something the first time, it's like, okay, well, was I just feeling defensive, or do I actually disagree with that note? And if you give yourself time, it usually helps with that. I know it's hard with fellowships because you have deadlines and you're like trying to work pretty fast. But yeah, if it is ultimately what I set out to do thematically, tonally, comedically, then I'm like, okay, I think it's ready. And it really helps having reps whose voices I super love and I value their opinion completely and I trust them completely, because now that's become my ready gauge. Like,
when did they come on board? Before or after?
They came after the blacklist because a friend in that program introduced me to them, nice. Which I'm super grateful for. And I think I met them in February because I wanted to have, so basically finished the blacklist, was doing a rewrite of the script that got me into that based on notes I got from that program. And the brilliant women in that, like, just really loved their views on what to change. I was like, totally agree with all of this stuff. So I did a rewrite, but I wanted to give myself time. And then I got the Nick program and I was like, oh, I need more time for this rewrite. And I wanted to have 2, and I wrote a new sample. So like I wanted to have 2 really solid samples so that they could read the first one. If they liked it, then what was helpful for me was to have them read my second sample and get notes on it, because I wanted to make sure I agreed with how they gave notes, because if they didn't see it the same way as me, we're probably not the right team. But they got exactly what I was going for, and their notes were super helpful. So now it is such a dream come true that I don't have to be like, is this what I wanted? And like overthink if it's ready or not. I'm just like, guys, is this ready? And they're like, no, fix this. And then it's ready.
And just in case someone's just jumping on, it's the Women in Film Blacklist.
Yes.
Fellowship was the first one that you did because Blacklist has a lot. Yeah. And then the second one was the Nickelodeon. One of the questions that actually came up, and so you just touched on that, is what do you think is a solid portfolio? How many scripts should you have ready to go?
Yeah. The first thing I'll say is that I think all of the fellowships I've talked to want to know that you're working on something always. So like, even more than a number, it's important to like actually be working on something else. And sometimes they're like, what's it about? And you have like, don't lie. Don't be like, yeah, I'm working on something if you're not. Like, think of something. If you want to do this as a career, you should always be working on something. Doesn't mean like you have to work every single day or you're not worth anything as a person. I don't stand by that. But like, always have an idea you're working on and writing on. For me, I think I had that I would show people. I think I had 3 pilots that I was proud of. Okay. I had more than that will never see the light of day.
And were they all, because I know you did animation and live action. Yeah. So were they
2
live
action? 1 animation. Yeah.
Interesting.
And then
we actually
another like a feature that I was working on that I could talk about if they were like, what are you working on now?
Interesting.
But I don't think they're going to be like, you don't have 3, like, or you don't have 4. Like, that's not how they're measuring it. But if you only have 1, I think that's a red flag.
I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, you spoke about the fact that you applied to the program a couple of times.
Yeah.
Right? So inherently, you should have a couple.
Exactly.
From applying a couple of times.
That's true. I had 3 originals and then 1 spec. Well, and so like you can totally throw in that you have specs or you've done more than 1 spec. Like, that's a useful thing as well. That counts.
And for the sample that got you in, that was your original sample, was animated. Someone asked about the tone. Would you be able to share with us, is it more of like a SpongeBob tone or an Avatar tone?
Yeah, I mean, Nickelodeon is open to and loves both, but mine was much more like SpongeBob, Gravity Falls, like heavy, silly kids comedy. Yeah.
This has been so fantastic. I would love to, if anyone has any other questions about applying specifically, let us know. But I would love to talk to you a little bit about, what you have done with this opportunity. So you've used these programs, it seems, as a springboard, to review for people who might just be jumping on. You did the Women in Film Blacklist Fellowship, and through that program, you made friends, you connected with your fellow program members, and they recommended you to your current reps. They were a good fit, and they also read your sample for you, which I'm sure helped in the preparation for the Nickelodeon program. And then you did the Nickelodeon program, and you mentioned it earlier, but please elaborate a little bit on why you have left the program early.
And so grateful that Nickelodeon was very supportive, but I got staffed on a Peacock show, True Story. It was so cool and so fun. It's kind of like, it's like a reenactment show, so people come in and tell a true story to Ed Helms and Randall Park, and then we write like reenactments based off that fully ridiculous and true story. But that's been really fun, and I left in May for that. Yeah.
Wow. And would you say that's kind of like a comedy, or almost like maybe more in like the vein of maybe like late night, like skit?
Yeah, it was definitely like a hard comedy. Like, everything we wrote was very joke heavy. It wasn't a sketch per se, but it was kind of like Drunk History, where you're like taking what someone set up, and we were still trying to build a story and build character and stuff like that. But very funny, quick cutaways. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I love it. So we'll finish up with a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Sorry, I see a question in the chat, so I'm going to try and sneak it in. The 500-word essay is similar to what is posted on the Nick website about the fellows? Interesting. So I think what Jennifer is asking is if your personal statement was like your bio, which is on the Nickelodeon episode website. Honestly,
right
now. When
I was applying, I kind of studied the other bios on the page. So Jennifer, very smart. It's not exactly that, but it was pretty close. Like, the program helps you really emphasize, like, they work with you to make your bio stronger and work on your personal pitch and all that stuff. But yeah, those are really great gauges for like, how do you tell a short, quick, interesting narrative arc about yourself? Yeah.
And yours was really funny. I loved, like, right away you started with a joke.
Yeah.
When I read it, I noticed that, that's something that stood out to me. So that's really great. One more thing about samples.
Yes.
Someone asked if you have any recommendations for choosing from the accepted shows list.
Yeah.
Someone said supposedly that you should avoid a show like Bob's Burgers because they've been on for so long, though it's on the list. Do you think that's the thing?
I think that if it's on the list, you're allowed to do it. Like, it's truly fair game. I think it's more helpful to think about what show do you love the most. So, like, if you are like, I love Bob's Burgers, don't not do a Bob's Burgers episode just because it's been on for so long. But, like, be wary of being too in the Bob's Burgers fandom. Like, don't make inside jokes that someone who's only seen 6 episodes would not get. But I do think it is a real thing that, and I think Nickelodeon actually on their Twitter like a year ago or 2 years ago posted this, so maybe go do some digging. They used to post how many scripts got submitted for each show.
I've seen that, definitely.
Yeah, and like Bob's Burgers is one they get a lot for, I think, because it's animated. I think because it's very funny. It's like a very good sitcom with big characters. So if you were like, I love Bob's Burgers, but I also really love, I don't know if Dickinson's on the list, so I'm just making this up. But if it's like, I really love Dickinson, if you can write both, like maybe pick the newer one just to help yourself, but don't turn away from something just because it's been on a long time if it is genuinely your favorite and you know those characters that well and you can write the best episode of it.
I think that also comes from the fact that, so if the show gets canceled, it's not a current show anymore.
Yeah.
And so your spec is quote unquote dead. But I think, like we spoke about, the specs are really just an exercise anyway. They're not really a hiring tool anymore. So I don't know if you have to worry so much about the fact that your spec doesn't live for multiple years, because you should be writing a new spec every year.
Yeah.
If you have to apply a couple of times, you shouldn't be resubmitting the same spec, right?
They definitely count that against you at most fellowships. They like keep track of what you applied with. So if you apply with the same one, it won't work anyway.
Yeah, I did something that was definitely going to kill my spec, but it worked for me. I did a show where they were doing the application cycle was that they just finished their like second season. And so I did the first episode of season 3, which is like supposedly a no-no, but it got me advanced. So it didn't matter. And then the show ended up getting canceled. And so it was kind of like it was quote unquote dead, but it didn't matter because I was already, I already used it for the purpose, which was to showcase the fact that I could write a spec, right?
Totally.
So I think that was really good advice about like, don't worry, if it's on the list, they put it on the list.
Yeah.
You did have a good point about standing out. I'm sure that the most popular show on television with the highest ratings is probably going to have the most specs.
Yeah.
So maybe
where
that's
having
something.
Your personal point of view in that storyline, and again, not shoved in. I'm not saying like make a character from Florida like me just because you want to be like, I'm from Florida. That doesn't help you. But if you are going to do a show like that, that's where it's like extra useful to be like, what can only I write about? So that way there's not 6,000 other applications with the exact same storyline. Because if you just continue what happened in the last episode, like there's a chance other people are going to have the same idea.
That's so true. I have to admit, I have a spec that I wrote and the show came back this season. And I was like, I'm seeing a lot of my storylines in the actual show. But, it's because I wrote things that make sense for the actual show. It wasn't the exact same thing, and so obviously I had my own thing and my own spin on it. But it's true, like what makes sense for those characters, what makes sense for those characters. So that's such great advice. And I think even what you said about bringing in this new character who isn't necessarily the star, because the show already has a star, but maybe that's a way that you can also insert something a little bit.
Right.
So this has been so awesome. I would love for you to share any other advice you have for applying this year, something that maybe I didn't think of asking.
Okay, 2 things. One is I met with a showrunner last week who was really great. And when I told her I got into the NIC program, she was like, oh, I got denied from there multiple times. Congrats on getting in. So, and she has like she is a showrunner and creator. She has 2 seasons of a show. It's unbelievable. So like, if you don't get in, it is not a sign that you're not supposed to do this. Like, don't read into it. Don't let it knock you down and stop. Like, there are a lot of paths to this career if you really want it. Just make sure you're writing all the time and keep applying. Honestly, it has been very useful for me to get used to getting rejections. Like, I don't know how many programs I've been rejected to over the years. And even last year when I got into 2 programs, I know I didn't get into NBC. I didn't get into NBC Late Night. Like, you know what I mean? Like, even the years where it's like somebody thought I was good enough, somebody else was like, no, she's not. So truly do not read into that. Like, I think the most helpful writing advice I've ever been given is like, move on to the next thing. When you finish your first thing, like when you're genuinely done, you've come to a place where you're done with it, you've submitted your application to Nickelodeon, like, great, now what's your next project? Like, don't sit and spiral and wait and check Twitter all the time to see if people have gotten interviews. It's not useful. It's not worth your time. So that's my first bit of advice. My second is I am a dysfunctional perfectionist in recovery, and someone in the program gave me the advice of like, figure out what good enough is for you and like live with that, because like try really hard on these applications. They matter. Put your voice into it, work hard at it, but like don't spend 300 hours straight. Like don't not sleep because you're rewriting your personal essay 600 times. Like, you know what I mean? Like find that level of like, I worked really hard at this. I'm proud of this. It sounds like me. I'm done. Because half the time, who knows if you're going to get read or you're going to make it through the next round. Like I know some programs read one of your originals, and if they don't like it, they don't read your second original. So like, yeah. And then they don't read the personal essay. So it doesn't mean don't try, but don't spend so much time that you're not living your life or working on things that you're really passionate about.
And so now that you have just gifted us with all this wisdom, and I have to say, just as your friend, I'm just so excited to see this for you and just so proud of you and seeing this confidence. Yes.
It's all fake. It's all on Zoom. If I had to have my hands up the whole time, I'd be failing.
No, it was amazing. I mean, we met over Zoom, and I love seeing your growth and love seeing this. Yeah. So if you're someone watching and thinking like, oh no, and you're feeling insecure about your project, well, this is the year that you're going to get into 2 fellowships and then come speak on Industry Insider next year. So yeah. It's your time. Don't worry.
Yeah.
So I would just love to hear, as we close out, what's next for you? What's your next goal? Once you're big hotshot star that you are.
What a hotshot star staring into my unemployed future. No, I really don't know, and I'm trying to be okay with that in terms of like what is literally next. I don't know. But I really want to staff again. It was so addicting. It was so fun. I cannot believe it's a real job where you get paid to pitch jokes with funny people all day. It is truly the dream. And so I would love to get staffed again. I'd love to develop. And we'll be moving to LA soon if I can get a sublease. So figuring that out. But yeah, those are my next 3 big goals.
That's amazing. And this is so exciting. So now you have to promise me that now that Latinx Heritage Month is coming up, you are going to be a mentor
for
our next cohort of the Read Latinx Writers Initiative.
It's going to make me emotional, but would love to, yeah.
It's so exciting. I love seeing that, the graduation, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. This was Hunter Toro from the Nickelodeon Writing Program. She is now a hotshot staff writer. So if you're staffing and you happen to see this, give our girl a call.
Love you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And everyone check out Dom's short. I know you posted it in the email.
Oh, yes. I just had a film premiere on PBS. So I had my first TV writing credit through kind of an unorthodox way. Yeah. So that hustle is real, like you say. Always doing things and always hustling.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you again. And thanks everyone for coming. And if you have any questions in the future, you can put them in the chat and I'm sure I can ask her.
Yes, for sure.
Alrighty, thank you so much. Thanks everybody.
Bye.